So now I think we're going to switch to, what time is it, 3? Introduction to quarterly reports. So you've probably noticed Jenny and I talk about agency periodic reports and quarterly reports. They're kind of interchangeable. Always before it's just been a quarterly report. But when they set up OPTIS, we wanted to allow the flexibility for annual reports or monthly reports, so we titled it periodic report. So we call them APRs for short.
Does that mean you're thinking about maybe changing up the quarterly to something else in the future? Or?
There's a lot of discussion about that. Some providers would love to go to monthly reporting, and some think yearly would be fabulous. It's hard because we are required to collect data from you and then give it to the feds, and sometimes they want it quarterly, and so what would be your choice? More frequently or
Less frequently.
less frequently?
Well, see,
Depends
the
on
thing
when you use
is,
your money.
if you only have 1 or 2 grants to manage, monthly's okay. But if you're managing
Mhm.
15 grants and you have to go in monthly to do this reporting,
Yeah, that's true.
it become a nightmare.
And we do have different types of reports. If you have an inner city grant, then there's an inner city service report. The JARC and New Freedom have annual reports. Sharon does NTD reporting and I think there's another annual report that she does. And so we're hoping we could get all the reporting information that we need from you in OPTIS, and also simplified. So this is a good time to talk about this new person. Well, he's been there, I think, over a year. Craig Baccio was hired to research our current reporting requirements and then make some recommendations on how to streamline it a little bit, because we know we ask for tons of information, and some of which, and the questions he's asking are really good. It's, why are we asking for this? What do we get out of it? Are we required to ask this? Are we just doing it out of convenience? Are we just doing it because we've done it that way for 20 years? So he's been asking a lot of questions. He went out and visited. I don't know if any of you met him, because he did go out to different agencies and talk to people. And I can't remember his title, quarterly reporting coordinator or something like that. So he's finished his research, and he's currently creating this recommendation to streamline everything. And maybe we could have one report, or for instance, maybe you could log into OPTIS, and OPTIS already knows what kind of grant agreements you have. And it could say, oh, you have this and this, so we need this and this. Rather than you trying to go to these grant trainings where you said your head was going to explode. Because there's so many details in which report and which piece of paper. So eventually it would be nice if OPTIS would do a lot of that for you and just give you fields. And if you saw the field there, oh, they need something there, rather than you having to remember, okay, I have a JARC and New Freedom grant, so I have to do those annual ones. And I have ARA, and they're what, weekly or something? And anyway, so it was important enough for Michael Ward to hire another person. He's a temporary person, but to research this and make recommendations and try to make it better, because we know it's kind of ridiculous. So all that is to say that we call them periodic reports in OPTIS, or APRs.
Well, I guess the only thing that would be in relation to the quarterly reporting is you can't submit reimbursement requests until after you do your first quarterly. And so if that was pushed back, does that mean you have to push back your reimbursement request?
Yeah, that's a whole
further?
other thing. That's true.
And that creates issues as well. So
Very true.
Yeah,
if it was only 6 months or a year, if you have to wait a year to get your reimbursements, that would be bad
Right.
detrimental to some
Right.
agencies.
And we really do need to know, what you're doing in order to validate what we're paying you. And so that is hard. Jay alluded to something that has always been a policy from what I understand, but we've never enforced, which is we cannot pay you if you're not current on your reporting. In the past, depending on the program manager, depending on different philosophies of administrators, we've held you to that or we haven't held you to that, and it's been kind of capricious. And so OPTIS is set up black and white. If you do not have your quarterly report in, you will not be able to request reimbursement, period. Now, there is an exception to that, now that I said black and white. The exception to that, and we haven't figured out a way for OPTIS to deal with this, is capital purchases. So if you're purchasing a vehicle, you want to get paid as soon as you take possession of it. You know, you don't want to wait until the quarter's over and then report and then request. So for capital purchases, you have to contact Joni. And when you're doing the reimbursement request, if you're not up to date, if it happens in the middle of a quarter or something, you can contact Joni and she'll go into OPTIS and you'll create the reimbursement request all the way up to the last step where it says you can't submit it because of the quarterly report issue. Contact her and she'll push it through and we'll go ahead and get you paid. Okay, good question. So just for a visual, this is the old quarterly report that I'm sure you're familiar with. And then a lot of you submit a budget detail worksheet also. OPTIS replaces this, but it doesn't replace this. So you'll be creating this in OPTIS completely electronically, but you'll still have to do this the way you have been and attach it to the OPTIS periodic report. That's another thing on the list of to-dos that eventually these are just fields. They could be put into OPTIS and you could enter this. One of the reasons we're waiting a little bit on that is because of Craig, the man I was just talking about, hasn't quite finalized his recommendations, and we don't want to make any big changes in OPTIS until we know kind of the big picture of what we're going to be requesting from you, especially since we have to go through the software developer and we can't just tweak it ourselves and then put it back or change it. So, but you will no longer be using this form at all if you're using OPTIS. That's the important thing to remember. Okay, so this is just general guidelines, and they apply to whether you're using OPTIS or not, that you need to submit a quarterly/periodic report if you have an active PTD-funded grant or you have a PTD-funded capital asset that you're still using. The reports need to be received or entered into the system no later than 45 days after the end of a quarter. I don't believe OPTIS stops you if it was the 46th day and you went in to do it, but this is our rule, but it's not I guess it's not a hard and fast rule. But it does need to be on file, meaning completed in the system before most grant payments will be authorized. And I have most here because there is that exception with the capital grants that we will kind of waive that, but we have to waive it manually by you letting us know. And Sharon will be here tomorrow. One of our very friendly neighborhood program managers will be here tomorrow to talk a lot more about reporting and what goes into reports and some of the nuances there, and there are quite a few. So, and I talked about you have to have it in. You'll get an error message that says quarterly report is not on file when you go to submit your reimbursement request if it's not done. Okay, so that's just the basics. And like I just said, the OPTIS APR is replacing the manual quarterly report. They are similar, but not exactly the same. I'm not sure what happened between when we handed this to the software developer and said we want things in this order and what actually came out the other end, because some of the orders were switched and wording was changed. I don't know quite how that happened, but it's similar enough that I don't think you're going to have any problem making the switch.
Especially for those new people.
Pardon me?
But especially for the new people.
Well, that's true. You've never done it any other way, so that's good. You enter the information right into OPTIS. The reason I say this is that we've actually had people scanning the old one and attaching it to OPTIS, not understanding that, no, you're going to fill in this information, key it in here. And so, and you can print if you want it. You can save it in progress if you want. Doesn't include the BDW, another 3-letter acronym. So you have to attach the budget detail worksheet before you submit it. This is just a comparison of the two. So on the left is the manual quarterly report, just the first page of it, and on the right is the OPTIS one. So it's the same information, it's just slightly different format. So each of the variables over here pull from wizards basically while you're setting up the report in the system. The Agency information just pulls from your agency profile that we've already set up. So that's real quick. You don't have to enter that every time. You just choose your agency and it'll populate all this stuff. You will choose an authorized representative, and then there's actually no signature here. We left the signature box, I guess just so it kind of resembles this one. But by virtue of Janice Ellis having an e-response keyword and being able to submit the quarterly report, that's what makes her name show up here, and that's how we know, that's one of the ways we know that she authorized it. The other way is to look at the workflow history, and we'll be able to see who the approver was on the document. Yes?
Are you going to talk about the fact that there are 2 fields there with a name, but they only get one option to choose a name? Because when you're walking through the wizard, you choose the person whose name populates those 2 fields, and people do sometimes become confused. They're expecting to be able to choose 2 different ones because of the way it's worded on there.
That's true. Over here, you'll notice on the old one, it has somewhere, person completing the report, and then authorized representative, which are 2 different people. And OPTIS doesn't allow for that. There's no field for the person completing the report. That is saved within the document in the workflow history, but it doesn't appear in the report itself. And so that's what you're talking about. It is kind of confusing. So they look kind of the same. The biggest difference then is just the signature. On this one, you would actually have a real person signing it. On here, it's all electronic. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And I have this slide in here because, and for the new people, this isn't probably an issue at all, but when I first started working at public transit, you could use the quarterly report to actually request reimbursement. You could mark the grant agreement, and then there was a space where you could put your reimbursement. And some people still think they can do that, and you can't. So it's 2 completely separate documents, the periodic report and the reimbursement request. You have to have your periodic report in order to request reimbursement, so they're very closely related. And a lot of people do it at the same time. They'll go in and submit their report and then request reimbursement the same day, but they're completely separate documents. I've talked a lot about this, the validation process that ensures that agencies, both the agency and the individuals, are authorized to view, create, and submit. And that's the whole e-response thing. So only a validated for e-response user may create an OPTIS agency periodic report. Only a validated user with signature authority can submit it, so they've got the e-response keyword. And this is what that's talking about. So we give you an e-response keyword and you enter it at the last step of both quarterly reports and reimbursement requests. And that's your electronic signature. So before you begin creating an agency periodic report, it's really important that your assets are correct, because OPTIS pulls the assets where you're going to be reporting the mileage and the condition right from the asset register. So the very first thing, if you haven't already done, and that's what those reports we handed out earlier will help you do, is to just verify, and you may not have to do this every time, because once we've got it all cleaned up, you'll probably be all right, but just make sure that your asset register is correct before you start creating a periodic report. Otherwise, you'll get there and you'll be getting ready to report on a vehicle and it won't be there for whatever reason, some of which we talked about. You can, and it happens occasionally, and Jenny will work with you on this, for some reason, the vehicle isn't on your asset register and we don't want to put it back on, but you still need to report on it. You can use, there's a couple of narrative fields where you could just type in and say, this vehicle, VIN number such and such, I already talked to Jenny, and just communicate to us that way. But for the most part, we want you to make sure your assets are verified before you start your report. And then just don't create quarter 4 report if there's already a quarter 4 report in the system. So just verify that you're not duplicating. Not sure if the system will allow you to submit 2 from the exact same quarter. It does?
No, it just won't let you complete them though.
Okay, so you might go to a lot of work and then you'll get to the very end and it'll say quarter 4 report already exists and you would have wasted a lot of time. So just make sure you know which report is due and that you're working on. And again, contact Jenny if you have asset questions and Francine for reports. Is this okay with you guys?
I had someone just a few weeks ago, she accidentally created 2,
Okay.
and then she went back into the one that had no numbers in it, so she, oh, where's all my numbers?
Oh.
And then when I went to look, she had created 2, and it was.
Yeah, so don't delete the one that's
Yeah.
empty. Yeah,
And
so it
truly,
happens.
Especially while you're new, but anytime, if you're walking into a process and it starts to become confusing, please feel free to call us early. Don't get stressed and angry and frustrated before you call, because we're happy to help. We don't want you to feel bad.
True. And we can answer a question quickly that would save you an hour of work or something, and that's, we've all been there too with the frustration. Especially computer things. I yell at mine all the time, so. Good points. Okay, so, and I kind of already showed this, you just go to create documents if you have that privilege, if you're validated for e-response, and you click on create report, or create documents and create periodic report. It'll ask you to choose the organization. If you have more than one, you click next. You choose the biennium. This screen, you kind of work from the bottom up. You have to verify that all assets to be reported have been entered. Make sure that's checked. Choose the biennium, and then you would click create. Too bad this isn't at the top, but. And you'll get an error message. I can't remember what it says. It'll say you have not verified that all your assets are correct or something if you forget to check that. Sometimes it's bad because you'll choose a biennium and then realize, oh, I need to change that. And when you refresh the screen, the check goes away, and then you go to create, you're like, I already checked it, but you have to check it again. So. And it brings you to, this is one of those screens in OPTIS, kind of like a nothing screen, but it's,
Can I ask?
yes, yes.
At that point, when they choose biennium,
Mm-hmm,
and then they go through and they are doing the report,
mm-hmm.
and that's the incorrect biennium, later, they can't just go back to this screen and change this part, correct?
I believe you're right. I
That's
think
true.
they have to
So
delete
then
it and
you
start
have
over.
to delete your report and start all over and the correct biennium.
Right, and OPTIS, when you put in the
Bummer.
expense date, OPTIS goes back and looks at the biennium and the quarter that you've chosen and says, oh, your expense date is outside of that, and won't. Then, yeah, so that's true.
Bummer.
You can tell early though, the next screen you were just going to,
Mhm.
much like in the document number for the reimbursement request, that number there has the
Oh,
end of the, or the beginning of the biennium listed. So if it has 09 in the middle, that's the 09-11 biennium. So the ones you create now should say APR-11.
And APR is not April, it's Agency Periodic Report. No, seriously, I thought it was like, why are these all in April? I don't understand. But that's good, yeah, so the new ones will have 1-1 here. Thanks, Jenny, that's.
yeah.
So you click on continue, then it brings you to this wizard, and there are 13 steps in the wizard, at least this part of it. So the early few screens are just kind of setting up the main document, and sometimes it's good to take that APR 090654 and just jot it down when you're working through here. In case you do get interrupted, you can go back and search by that number and get right back to where you were. Well, not right where you were, but you'll find the right document. So you can go through the wizard methodically, step by step, do 1 and then do 2 and then do 3 and then do 4, which when you're first learning is probably the best way to do it. But you can skip around. For instance, if you know you don't have any volunteer and non-cash resources, when you have the screen open on the navigation menu, you could just go from the address screen to service data because you know you don't have to stop at that one. But like I said, wait until you're more familiar before you do that kind of skipping around. So I was going to go kind of carefully through all these, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory that some of the items from the new one are very familiar to you that used to be on the old one. So for instance, your address or something like that. The fiscal year and quarter, the agency information, the certification checkbox, those are all the ones you started at the very beginning when you chose that. You have the authorized rep name and signature like I showed you on the old one, and that's all taken care of right here. So these first three are taken care of with the details, and then that one, those two are here, etc. And here's where the order changed slightly. The old one had accidents, and then assets, and then civil rights, and this one has the same. Wait. No, it has assets and then
It's the
accidents and civil
revenue and
rights.
expense information is gone.
Right.
It calculates it itself.
Yeah, and so that's all in here, financial statement. So there's fewer fields if you look at it that way. There's also no longer a documented in-kind contribution worksheet required. Now that OPTIS asks you for volunteer and non-cash resources and you actually enter that, you don't have to send us this separate document. I think most of you already know that, but that's a good thing. And then so any of these things, the progress report and the budget detail worksheet would just be attached. Okay, so I'll skip over that. This is an actual screenshot of what somebody did that was new, and it's understandable. They were working on an agency periodic report. They got 2 attachments, and they attached their budget detail worksheet, which is good, they should have, and then they also attached their RRFs here, which are, you're probably all familiar with this. Yes? This is what you've been using to request reimbursement if you have been. This is obsolete once you're using OPTIS. So they were sort of mixing the old and the new, and they were doing their electronic quarterly report, which is great, but then attached the old reimbursement request forms to this, and then called several weeks later and said, I haven't been paid yet. And she said, I used OPTIS to submit my reimbursement request. But she didn't go into OPTIS and create a reimbursement request and do it that way. She just attached the old forms here. And there would be no way for us to know those were there. And they just sat there. And so just be careful that the only attachment you would attach to an agency periodic report is some sort of reporting document, either the budget detail worksheet or intercity service report or some of the other reports, but nothing to do with a reimbursement request. And so that's what this is. That's the budget detail worksheet that you'll attach.
The budget detail worksheet, is that somewhere here in the system?
It's on our website, but it's not in OPTIS.
It's not an OPTIS. You can't just click on it and go, okay, there it is.
No. However, there's a link when you're in the quarterly report that takes you to our website. So it helps you out that way, but you still have to go and create it and save it and then
It's
scan it.
separate.
And I'll show you how to do that tomorrow. So,
You'll show us tomorrow, you said?
yeah. And so just like the grant agreement, you can view the PDF and look at your agency quarterly report after you get it done. And that's just a joke about there's no such thing as PDF format. Because that's, yeah. But everybody says that, so.
Just like ATM machine?
Yeah, ATM machine. And then you would just complete the step, and then this is what the screen looks like. This is actually 2 different screens. One screen will be complete step, and when you complete the step, then this screen appears, and this is where this is the last step where you're gonna get ready to submit. You check the box, presuming you are the authorized representative, you check the box, and then type in your e-response keyword and hit submit. At this point, if you are just the preparer but not the approver, instead of hitting complete step, you would click on actions, I'll show you this also tomorrow, and forward. And so you create the report, you're all done with it, you forward it to your supervisor, who then would open it up and do this last step and submit it, because he or she is the one that has the e-response keyword. Ta-da. And there it is with its little open book. So that was just kind of an overview of that. Any questions about reports in general? Or?
You'll be walking through the details tomorrow, so if I have a uniform entry, I should bring that up tomorrow, right?
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah, so this is just an overview of the quarterly report where I can go through more detail.
Tomorrow.
This in reimbursements tomorrow.
Right.
Cool.
Right. I would go through right now, but I figure it's 3:30, it's kind of getting late. There's a couple other things I just wanted to show you really quickly. Francine mentioned that when you see the overview screen, it lists all your reimbursement requests and payment requests. After it gets to, is it 30, I think, or 25? It condenses it all. And we found kind of this little glitch where, if this would load, before they're condensed, you can't open a payment request. If you noticed, it doesn't have an underline, it's not a live link. So you could open this reimbursement request, but this you can't open. Once it condenses, then you can, for some reason. And I think if I go in, you must have more than 30. So I asked about this. I said, why is it that when there's just a short list, you can't open it, but then once it's condensed, you can open it? And was told that, oh, that's a glitch. We need to make it so they can never see those. And so I fought for you guys. I said, well, why don't we want them to see the payment request? It's their document. It's, and okay, so there are 58 or 56 documents. And so now it's all been squished, and so then you hit view here, and I believe you can just put a couple spaces in and say search, and the whole list will appear, and it's loading down here.
Again, and that list too is oldest to newest,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I think so. Anyway, I said I think that the providers, it's not like you can change them or anything. So now when the list opens up, these are live links, and you could actually open up a payment request and look at it. This is the part that Francine and Jenny do. So after you create the reimbursement request, OPTIS generates the payment request, and then they go in and fund it and forward it amongst whoever needs to see it and do their part. But I see no reason why you can't see it, so we'll see what they say. But anyway, just kind of a weird thing where you can only open it, the grant payment request, after it's been condensed into a big bunch. So let me just make sure there's nothing more I would like to talk about today.
I was going to add something.
Yep.
It's at this point and you are creating a reimbursement request. It helps to write the number down, because otherwise you have to go in and search for the newest one that you just worked on that will be clear at the end.
Right,
So
right,
take
right. And you do notice that there are
where you can just type it in.
There are 58 reimbursement requests and only 56 payment requests. Probably 2 of these reimbursement requests are not completed yet, so the corresponding payment request hasn't been created. And obviously this is the whole picture, not just one. Do you have a question? So any questions about anything? Tomorrow you'll get lots more practice. You'll do quarterly reports, reimbursement requests, and it'll feel like you're really learning something because you'll actually be doing it. So if there are no more questions or any questions, I think we'll stop there for the day. You can go out and enjoy the sunshine.
Yeah.
And thanks for being a great audience, and thanks for your patience as we record.